Hi, I'm Jim Jenner, and welcome to Secrets of Champions 7. Over the years, this film series has introduced you to some of the world's greatest pigeon men and women. Legends like Frank Tasker, Jeff Kirkland, Odd Sherlockens, Ronnie Williamson, and dozens of others. We've spent weeks in the UK, Belgium, and Holland capturing their lofts and methods. From there, we expanded the series to other countries such as Germany, Ireland, and Wales, where you met people who you might not have heard of, but who dominate racing in their region. This film is different. It's not as much about a dominating person as it's about a place. And it's not set in Europe, it's in America, land of the sports mantra that winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. But this is a story about a club and a community where winning comes hard, if it ever comes at all. And that sobering fact is what has made this place a magnet for more champion trainers than I've ever seen concentrated in a few square miles of real estate. Florida, Spring Hill, the Gulf Coast Homing Club. Welcome to living pigeon racing life in the fast lane. Let's begin by recognizing the man who made this movie possible, Willis Carrier. No, he's not some pigeon person you've never heard of. Carrier was an inventor, and what he created is what made Florida and the southern part of the USA habitable year-round. Florida, or as my friends in Europe call it, Disney, is a 400-mile-long, flat finger of land between the Atlantic Ocean and Gulf of Mexico. It's the site of America's oldest city, St. Augustine, founded in 1565. But for the next 400 years, it was a challenging place to live year-round. Half the year, the weather is warm and mild. In the late 1800s, developers built railroads and grand Florida hotels to attract people from the north to visit in the winter. But the summers, forget it. Days on end can be 85 degrees with 85% humidity. That makes it feel like you're living in a steam bath. Mr. Carrier invented air conditioning in the early 1900s. By the 1950s, his company and creation had spread like wildfire along the bottom of the country, what came to be known as America's Sun Belt. Air-conditioned movie theaters, shopping malls, schools, homes, and cars.
Tell me, what is the lowdown on this air conditioning thing?
This eventually led to a huge migration of people from the north to the sunny south. Towns and states like Arizona, Texas, and Florida doubled in size as people and industry relocated.
This wasn't just an appliance. It offered a new, cool way of life.
Where our story takes place is in central Florida, just north of Tampa, on the 28th degree of latitude. That puts it 1,600 miles closer to the equator than London or Antwerp. In fact, it lines up with the middle of the Sahara Desert, with one big exception. The Sahara is dry. This entire state is a few feet above sea level, between two huge bodies of water that produce massive cloud formations and regular torrential downpours. It's America's most humid state. The air gets so full of water molecules, it makes things hotter. It's called the heat index, and it works much like wind chill up north. You probably know that when it's 30 degrees outside, 0 degrees Celsius, for example, and the wind's blowing at 30 miles an hour, the effective temperature is actually 15 Fahrenheit or minus 10 Celsius. Dress warm. With the heat index, it's the temperature plus the humidity that makes the difference. For example, on this chart, you see that an 84-degree day with 80% humidity feels like 94, or almost 38 degrees Celsius. Tampa's average morning humidity is 88%, by the way. Average. Thanks to Mr. Carrier, air conditioning has made life bearable for the folks who choose to live here. But that's not why I'm spending time on this. The people can bounce from car to home to clubhouse and take a few showers in between. But let's remember who doesn't get to enjoy Mr. Carrier's invention: the pigeons that live and race here. Obviously, the temperatures aren't always in the high 80s, but late summer when pigeons are training and in the fall when they start racing, it's an issue. The heat index is only half the story. Now, I don't want to get all Mr. Science on you, but let me ask you a question. Which has more lift in flight, dry air or moist air? Well, moist air is full of water molecules, which displace heavier oxygen and nitrogen molecules. So humid air, no matter what the temperature, leads to lower air pressure because it has fewer of the heavier particles. The air has less lift. Here's an illustration from a pilot's manual. It shows that it actually takes longer to take off in humid air. The main runway at Orlando Airport is longer than the one at Denver's airport, the Mile High City. Less lift for a pigeon means more physical effort to stay aloft. And that's not all. Fewer oxygen particles in the moist air also means the bird is getting less energy with each breath. High heat and dry air, like flying over the desert in South Africa, is challenging enough. But warm to high temperatures year-round, combined with this being the most humid state in America, make Florida an incredibly challenging racecourse in the pigeon game. Please keep all that in mind as you see the lofts and hear about techniques that are unique to Spring Hill, and some techniques may not apply to where you live. But I hope you'll agree it's amazing how fast they get their birds to fly down here, considering all these facts. My history with pigeon films in Florida goes back more than 20 years to a time I visited Orlando to document the team of white homers that worked at Disney World. This footage, which is part of a film called Oldest Feathered Friend, showed how the birds were used in shows such as Beauty and the Beast and at the closing ceremonies of the park. Sadly, they don't have pigeons here anymore, and I'll explain why later, but I loved how well they trained the team to self-load. It was impressive. But unless your birds are only flying, say, 2 miles a couple times a day, you probably wouldn't want to keep them as lean as they did down there. Now, I didn't visit the club in Spring Hill then. It was about 2 hours due west, closer to Tampa and only a few miles from the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, hence the club's name, the Gulf Coast Homing Club, or GHC. Back then, it was a pretty typical club with a growing futurity race called the Classic. It wouldn't be until I came back in 2002 to do a story on the fast-growing club made up of racing retirees. That was part of Share the Blue Sky, a pigeon documentary series we did for Chinese television. By then, so many fanciers lived in a single housing tract they called it Little Belgium. It was actually a 600-lot development named exotically Unit 10 that they'd all gravitated to. A fancier from Illinois named Zig Vanderwall had been touting the place because acre lots and homes were less expensive than in the north, and it was all zoned agricultural. You could keep a horse, much less pigeons. By then, they'd borrowed enough to build a nice clubhouse and were paying back the loan with proceeds from the Classic, which in spite of the funky little sign on the telephone pole here was now one of the biggest money races in the States. In the decades since they'd inaugurated this December race, it had helped attract more national award-winning flyers to move here than any place in the country. Legends like Randall Berkey had come from Pennsylvania, Art Hees from California, Laurie McConnell from New York, Jerry McIntosh from Arizona, and on and on. I said in that script it was like Frank Tasker living next door to Jeff Kirkland and Odd Sherlockins on the next street and Ronnie Williamson a few blocks away. They'd adopted mandatory electronic timing, and everything about the operation was state-of-the-art. Probably most important, the crew included some of the hardest working people in the game, like Vernon Young, a retired Washington, D.C. policeman, accustomed to yelling at congressmen who might have parked in the wrong spot, and a New Yorker named Sal Lama, who quietly went about doing just about any task somebody else didn't do. They were shipping from here twice a week, and the GHC included fanciers outside the unit, but twice a week wasn't enough. So a group created another club just for Unit 10 residents so they could add 1 or 2 more races a week, and they wanted more. In 2002, they broke ground on what would be the biggest pigeon clubhouse in the Americas. Again, borrowing money from members and paying them back with interest, with 15% of the entry and pool money from the Classic. And it kept on growing. 5 years later, I came back for a chapter in my film about young bird racing, Secrets of Champions #3. Electronic timing was only beginning in the UK and Europe, and I wanted to show what happens when you put 100 lofts in about a square mile and add ETS. I profiled Berkey, Horst Hackemer, and the late Art Hees, who dramatically demonstrated how computerized clocking was a game changer if your pigeons hesitated even a few seconds at the end of the race.
Making them go in, making them come straight down.
That chapter was a real eye-opener for fanciers everywhere that were still pulling counter marks off returning birds. Remember the time it took to catch a bird, pull off the counter mark, get the little rascal into your clock, and turn the handle? Now with ETS, a dozen pigeons could be clocked in a few seconds. For the decade that followed, I profiled lofts everywhere but the USA. Belgium, Germany, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, even Poland. Oh, I wrote a book too. But during that period, we received a pretty regular flow of comments from customers that they'd like to see more American champions and/or Spring Hill. So this film got its start when I made a visit last spring to see what had been going on in my absence. I spent time with old friends who are still racing like crazy and just look a little older, like me. And as you'll see, the GHC is thriving. Unit 10 is still full of pigeon flyers, as is its little club, and the old guard is still in charge. They're adopting any new idea that will get them to win, but still, day after day, are probably as expert at the pigeon game as you will find anywhere. Just telling the story of these racing legends is a good film. But there's more to this story. As the baseball pitcher Satchel Paige once advised, don't look back. Something might be gaining on you. Well, there's a new generation back there, and it is coming up fast. Before I introduce you to any of the new kids on the block, let's take a minute to look at what Vernon and Sal and all the old guard have created here in Florida. Through good times and bad, they've managed to build a club that is a truly enviable place. I love a notice they have in a large club area next to the main entrance. It summarizes all the ways bullies and blowhards can wreck a pigeon club. I may tease these guys that we're all getting older, but there is one good thing about age. Sometimes it comes with wisdom. These veterans have seen how bad pigeon clubs can be when one bully runs things or any one person only seems to win. When you attract people who think they are hot stuff, but are really not, sore losers can be a headache. So can their lawyers. The GHC's bylaws are 9 pages long, single-spaced. They've been revised 16 times. All new members are on probation for 3 full years, and if you get suspended for any reason, it takes a 95% positive vote to get back in. Over the years, they've also perfected systems to make the shipping and race calculation process efficient and prevent cheating. They have an active drug committee and test top birds in all the money races. They've also eliminated gambling to make sure they don't run afoul of state law. Back when I visited in 2007, they were shipping in the huge club room in their new building. Each aluminum crate holds up to 40 birds, and they methodically make sure every trainer's bird, cock, or hen goes into a different basket. Then they'd wheel the crates outside and onto the trailer. But by the time I came back in 2016, they'd built a huge extension onto the north side of the building, big enough to back in their 4,000 bird transport and load directly into it. For a typical race, about 2,000 pigeons have to go through here in a couple hours, so the room has a factory floor efficiency. Members are expected to help load pigeons, and handlers can only pull their own birds from their crates. The birds are all carrying microchips, and they pass over a scanning pad. Most races limit the entries to 25 pigeons, and once they're registered, the owner gets a printout of his entry. On race day, everybody comes back in, hands their clock into the committee, and after each clock is downloaded, they get their clock back with another pink printout, showing when their pigeons timed in. It's a building designed specifically for all the steps to ship and calculate a pigeon race. I could tell you more, but I should let you take the official tour. While I was there, a visiting fancier, Tom Corey, who's an officer with Scotland's largest pigeon racing federation, came by with his family. This isn't unusual. Lots of pigeon people visit Disney World and then talk the family into letting them drive over to the legendary GHC. Club President Vernon Young showed the visiting Scots through the clubhouse.
Okay, they came up with the idea of building this.
Yeah.
Okay, we got, 15 members gave us $250,000 that we had to pay back. Somebody else donated the floors in here. Somebody donated the white picket fence. Somebody donated the palm tree. Somebody donated the other palm tree. I got $40,000 for donations. Everything came from the members. They just donated. And that's how we got it. This is where we ship.
Right. That's a photograph.
Yeah, we 4 stations, we ship, we got, electric clock.
Electric clocks, yeah. Put the feed on these as well?
Put feed on them as well, and then they cleaned it up, and then they put water on the top of it. In the summertime, like when it's hot, air conditioning, we have a big race, right? That pays for all this. We call it classic.
A classic, right?
And we get over 3,000 pigeons a year. And we pay out over 400,000.
400,000?
Yeah. First prize is 40,000. But the club makes money in that. We build all the stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we have a quarantine room in here where when the birds come in, we have to keep them until the vet checks them out.
Oh, excellent.
And then we pass them out to the guys. So they send the birds in here from all the states in Canada, Mexico. We get birds. We got 120 lofts, and they go to 120 lofts, and then we fly the race. We start on like Tuesday, and the people start coming in, and then on Wednesday we ship the birds.
Right.
And we have food, we feed them. We had a race on Thursday, and then Friday we have a seminar and auction or something like that. This is a list of the members, and that shows what cage the birds are in.
Yeah.
And then we got somebody to come and feed and clean them every day. They get a bird. And then the vet comes every Friday, and he vets them, and we get the birds out. Yeah, 4 weeks old, they come to us, and then they stay here for 3 to 4 days. For all these people, 120 people.
Right.
People call them and say, I want to send birds to your loft, and they say, okay. So they get birds. Each member can get 75 birds. And doing the classic and all that, people out here, and then we have a tent out there. Over here, we have an auction race in the same way. And over here, we have a $50, and we used to have a $100 band race. The guys. We have 20 members, and the women have 89. The women sell food to us on weekend shipment.
Yeah.
I'll show you the kitchen in a minute. Yeah. We have a group that live up on the short end, they call it Brooksville. Then we have a group down here at Spring Hill where we have 100 lofts down here and 100 lofts up there. And they are like 10 miles, 11 miles away. But we're right there together. Within 1 mile, about 2 miles.
Yeah.
100 lofts.
Vernon mentioned the ladies' auxiliary who oversee the kitchen and dining room. It's a nice benefit to have food and snacks while you wait for results or after you ship your birds. The service is friendly, the food is inexpensive, and you never leave the club. That's a vital thing when you consider how often fanciers are in this building. The GHC typically races a short race on Monday and another on Saturday, twice a week, 9 months a year. Old birds from January through early May, and young birds from September through December. That's getting close to 70 races a year. Add to that the smaller club races of Unit 10 and the Short Ends Club, the Florida Suncoast or FSI, plus races with the Tampa Combine, and you can race over 100 times a year. Not that anyone does, but some come close. But of all those events, the one that everyone shoots for is the Classic. From February through the end of June, breeders throughout North America ship young birds to take part in this December event. I went with Hugh Frazier in April for a typical pickup of birds at the local post office. Each of these boxes contains young pigeons whose owner has paid the flat $100 entry fee. They come to the GHC, are entered into the system, and as Vernon pointed out, go into quarantine for a week. From there, they'll be assigned to one of the more than 100 GHC members who can accept up to 75 entries. Most birds go to a requested handler. The first classic had 167 entries, then 461, then 791, and today more than 3,000 birds, generating almost $400,000 in entry fees, are part of this year's race. First prize is $40,000. The breeder gets 60%, the handler 40%. Most important for the club is the 15% it takes off the top. That percentage, 15%, may not sound like much, but it's done wonders for the GHC. This huge building and everything in it, including the transport, are paid for. And their financial health is another admirable legacy of the old guard who built all this on a patch of sandy Florida scrubland. Throughout the Western world, many pigeon organizations are dwindling. Clubs have to consolidate with others or close. It's sad, and I hope the bleeding stops soon. But the GHC, while unique, is thriving in no small part because of sound management. But many founders are in their 70s, still racing in their 80s even. What's next? You'll see. When I visited Unit 10 again this spring, Jerry McIntosh was especially helpful in driving me around and talking about the changes since my last visit a decade ago. There have been many, some sad, including over 125 funerals here for GHC members since it was founded. Many of the homes and lofts are on their third or fourth owner. That's a sobering statistic, but it's tempered by the fact that those who passed spent their retirement years doing what they loved. But the more I talked to my old friends, the more I realized there were some fascinating changes occurring among the new faces. So when I returned at the start of the youngbird season, I set out to see what the new guard was like. I think you'll enjoy this cast of characters. Bill Midiu fits the classic mold of a new face in the unit. A career firefighter from the Chicago area, he dreamed of retiring to race here. Eventually, he and his wife Karen found a house they liked, and Bill put up a new loft 5 years ago. Actually, it was Karen that liked the house. Bill was partial to the big garage that he turned into a woodworking shop and a beautiful breeding loft. He quietly got to work climbing up the result sheet and had a typical disappointment. He lost out on the first place in the Unit 10's big money race by a 1/10 of a second. Now let me take you about a half mile away from Bill Midiu and about 10 pigeon lofts across the flat, sandy land and lush trees within the unit. I visited Villa Rosa Loft, where Mike Caraturia is partners with Anthony Natali. Another pretty typical story. Mike retired from his family's Italian restaurant and bought the house with pool and adjoining pigeon lofts when he came here. Getting back into serious racing after a number of years away, Mike hooked up with another Big Apple native by way of Arizona, and he and Anthony are fighting their way onto the first page of the race report, where coming in between first to 50th is an honor. Win or lose, they get to live and breathe pigeons 7 days a week and experience the unfailing excitement seeing their first race bird arrive. Taking over a loft someone else built and having to decide if it's a good structure for racing is a pretty common challenge of newcomers like Mike and Anthony. I did notice one thing you probably don't have on your loft: hurricane clips to keep it from blowing away. At the northern edge of the unit, Manny Rodriguez was a rare Hispanic face when he arrived from Miami in 2007. But he got a sympathetic reception from the unit's old guard when they learned that in the early 90s, Manny'd escaped from Castro's Cuba in a leaky boat to get to America. But their sympathy was soon tempered by the fact that after a typical start in '08, Manny proved to be an exceptional breeder and handler. His Gallo loft took the top 3 places in the next year's Classic, winning almost $80,000. Birds he's bred have won in money races as far away as Canada and South Africa. He and his wife Katya are a racing team And Manny is one of the very few fanciers in the area that I met who actively sells pigeons. New faces from the Spanish-speaking South have been matched by immigrants from the North. Down near the bottom of the unit, there's a flyer named Dragon Romanovich. Now, you know this guy is not from Havana. Actually, Dragon, his real name, is Serbian, by way of Wisconsin and Fort Lauderdale. He came to America at 18 and owned a successful auto body shop before he sold it and came to the unit in 2010 to race full-time. He's a friendly, happy-go-lucky guy, but he gets the job done. He's always a threat in the Classic and is also the rascal who beat Bill Midiu by a microsecond in the big challenge race. Did you notice a pattern? Manny isn't even 50, Dragon's just barely, and here's another new face, also in his 40s, also an immigrant. Niall Hyde is a native of Dublin who came to Chicago as a teen. He became a builder and developer before deciding to go all in and race in the unit. He showed me the plans for his huge new loft, drawings that are required by the county. You have to document how far your loft is going to be from adjoining homes, but the government is not the enemy. A few years ago, Zig and others gave the county commissioners a tour of the best lofts and then got them to create a permanent ordinance that allows a pigeon loft to be up to 1,500 square feet. That's bigger than Niall's house, and no limit on the number of birds you keep. This will be the Dubliner's first season, but he's been a frequent visitor for races over the year and is a dedicated student of the game. My next visit was to a more typical newcomer, retiree, from Chicago, who came to race the same year as Bill Midiu, except this retired school teacher is a lady, Tammy Thomas. She got the racing bug late in life and arrived with a million questions for the old guard. They smiled a bit in the early years until they saw how tirelessly she worked, how gently she treated her pigeons, and finally how well they flew. She trained the fastest young pigeon in the unit last year and won a race a few days after we visited. Then there's another group that breaks the mold of this place being only a retiree's pastime. Jim Shumway printed phone books for years in Colorado until the business died off and he lost his job. He decided he'd rather do whatever it took to live in Spring Hill and race with the big boys. He visited several times to check it out and met his new Florida wife, Sharna, in the process. Now he mows lawns, works at a local supermarket, and races like crazy. It works out well that his wife has a job for a big bank that she can do from home. Another new face that also breaks the stereotype is Paul Hanna, who, like Manny, Jim, and Niall, is not yet 50. Paul pulled up stakes after a couple of decades as a top salesman for a Chicago liquor distributor. Paul bought a house across the street from Randall Berkey, a stone's throw away, built a new loft, and took a job at one of the local feed stores to augment his savings. So he races full-time and spends his entire workday selling feed and pigeon medications. Like most of the newcomers, he's a hard worker, helping with club and classic operations. And then there's Jack. He's an old friend of Lori McConnell, who graciously invited me to stay in his spacious home for the weeks I was filming in September. Jack's experience helps to illustrate so much about the costs and concerns people have when they make a big decision to move thousands of miles to live here. Like so many flyers in the GHC, Jack was a pigeon prodigy. He won his first big race with his dad when he was 14 years old. He had a 30-year career as a baker, eventually working for Kodak like Lori McConnell, who also gave Jack a lot of good pigeons over the years. You probably never heard of Jack Tedesco, but they knew him well in Rochester. He won the last race he flew there before he made the life-changing decision to leave New York. But I'll let Jack tell it.
My mother, she was 91 years old, and I was at home taking care of my mother for like the last 3 years, and she was failing. The last couple of months she started to go downhill, failing and all that. And but we were sitting at the kitchen table one day, and she knew she was, going. And typical Italian mother, like, oh geez, Jack, I don't know what you're gonna do. You're gonna be all by yourself. Who's gonna feed you? You don't have a wife. I'm really worried about you. I don't know what you're gonna do. And I knew my friends were down here already, the Kyle, Luberts, Jaworski, and all them. And kind of half joking, I said, well, you know, I could go down to Florida and just fly pigeons with my friends. I said, they're all down there, I could do that. But I was kind of kidding. I wasn't really gonna do it. I was born and raised in the same town for 50 years. I never left the town. I moved 3 times, but I never left the town. So I said that to her, and she kind of looked at me, and she says, Jack, that's what you got to do. She said, I want you to go, enjoy your life, don't worry about anything, don't worry about finances or anything. Just go and enjoy your life because there's nothing left for you to do here. She says, there's nothing left for you to do. Go there. So I said, well, yeah, it kind of in one ear, out the other. And so she passes a couple months later. It took me 8 months, but I'm in her house now, and I'm like, geez, nobody here. It's kind of quiet. It's kind of sad. Nothing was really changing. So all of a sudden, I said, what am I going to do? All of a sudden, that conversation popped into my mind. That's right. My mother told me to go do this. This is what I'm supposed to do. I have her blessing. And so once I knew that, I was like so forward. I said, okay. I never looked back. So within weeks, I sold the house. I came down here, found this house, went back, sold that house. I was gone within weeks. And I never looked back. I didn't have any regrets. Because I said, my mother gave me the blessing. So I couldn't have gone wrong.
Jack's Italian, through and through. And I hope you can see that this new crop of competitors is a United Nations. But that's here in Unit 10. There's a little different story up north, what they call the short end. We'll get to that next. Unit 10 earned the nickname Little Belgium because dozens of lofts sprang up in a single neighborhood. Back in the 1980s, that density reminded people of Antwerp or West Flanders. Sadly, although there may still be that many pigeon lofts in a Belgian town, many of them are abandoned. It's in parts of Taiwan, China, Poland, or Romania where this kind of density might now be found, if at all. But not everyone who wanted to could live in Unit 10. It was a little more expensive, and often there simply weren't homes for sale. Over time, people who wanted to race settled well outside Unit 10 and were still able to fly with the GHC. That's because while this big clubhouse is less than a mile from the unit, they'd set the top boundary for the club on Centralia Road, 12 miles north of the clubhouse. That much closer to race stations in Georgia and Tennessee. In 2002, this is what I filmed on the short end. North of Spring Hill was an area of less expensive land, dirt roads, and minimal services. The lofts up here were nothing to write home about. But that was about to change. In 2005, Hugh Frazier was one of the first retirees to settle up here. A retired police detective from San Francisco, he built racing and breeding lofts and settled into race pigeons full-time. He didn't mind the remoteness or the drive to the GHC. Hugh had a hunch that being shorter than the unit might be a benefit. It took several years, but eventually his hunch paid off. This is what some of the lofts on the short end look like today. These are the AAA lofts of Andy and Lisa Guillemot, who arrived just before Hugh. Their next door neighbor, Ron Mariani, built his Circle lofts in 2007. Aren't they beautiful? And yes, Ron is Italian. Canadian John Marles also chose to settle on the short end in 2008. So did Rick Biasucci, who moved from Fort Lauderdale with Dragon in 2010. He also chose the wide open spaces of the short end. You'll meet all these flyers later, but you can see some very successful retirees made a serious commitment to what had once been a sparsely populated pigeon country. But that's only part of the story. Of the 3 most common names in America, The GHC's 7-page member roster has no Smiths, no Johnsons, and 1 member named Williams. However, there are 6 members named Rodriguez, including Big George, or in Spanish, Grande George. Grande Loft may not be as shiny as some of his neighbors, but this refugee from Castro's Cuba is a big part of the shift of victories from the unit to the short end, as more and more flyers settle in what the post office calls Brooksville, north of Spring Hill. Grande raced pigeons in Cuba, which has a novel system of state-run racing. There are 3 levels. Beginners get a certain amount of pigeon food. If you win, you go to the next level and get more food. And if you're a champ, you're in the top tier and get even more government pigeon food. Grande got off a leaky boat and worked in Miami as a tow truck driver before deciding to head north to compete in the GHC. If they can call Unit 10 Little Belgium, then the heart of the short end could be called Little Havana. Although that's not really fair to the guys from Puerto Rico and Mexico who make up the growing Hispanic flavor of the GHC. But within a mile of Big George, mixed in with Fraser, AAA, Marls, and other Northerners, are dozens of flyers with Spanish surnames. Many have the affinity with livestock, especially birds rural people are known for, but they also tend to be younger and very hardworking with their pigeons. It's one of the ingredients in this stew here that has made the legends of Little Belgium try even harder to stay on top. The lofts up here now often ship twice as many birds as the South. It affects the overall GHC results so much that they split the main result into North and South sections. Winning either of those is almost as prestigious as winning the whole shebang. So you can see that Northern retirees and Southern refugees are the major characters in our story. For some, Dutch, Polish, Serbian, and Hispanic, English is not their mother tongue, but they all speak pigeon racing fluently. And I want to share with you the many ways this diverse flock houses, trains, and races their birds. You'll see there are many methods to get your name on that all-important first page of the result sheet. If your dream is to retire and race pigeons for the rest of your days, you probably don't skimp on your dream pigeon loft. And although they may not be as long-lasting as the brick houses Belgian and Dutch families passed down for generations, these wood and metal buildings are easily some of the finest in the Americas. I hope you enjoy these views from my aerial camera. They certainly give you the same view the pigeons get coming home. Although these nice lofts vary in size and shapes, there are some basic elements that have been adopted down here. The most common design is for the aviary to double as a landing board, so the birds are totally familiar with the timing pad they must step on to be timed in. The aviary floors are fairly wide wire. Not only do the droppings go through, but there's a theory that the birds will prefer to land on the solid pad rather than wire when they're landing from a race. Obviously, in a tropical environment, they can get away with much more open lofts than in the north. You notice most of these lofts have a high raised front. This is intended to let warm air rise above the birds and vent, although I noticed that this natural airflow is not always as reliable in some lofts as others. Laurie McConnell has always had a very sophisticated loft with fans that can be activated by a thermostat. This gives him the option of getting the air moving on a still, hot day. He pointed out to me that there was absolutely no bloom on his walls, so obviously the air is rising and carrying it away.
This loft was built in 1999, and it's never been wiped or cleaned. And look at it, no dust.
Where you begin to see a lot of variation is in the kind of floors these lofts have. Laurie has slatted wood and trays underneath, not uncommon up north. But the most common style is for the loft to have a wooden hallway at the front, and for the sections where the birds are to be expanded metal wire. It's industrial grade and strong enough to walk on, and the droppings fall straight to the ground where they can be raked out. John Marles uses this system in his breeding loft, but makes sure the perimeter beneath the floor is closed off so no vermin can get beneath the pigeons. Manny Rodriguez's Gallo loft is all wire underneath the perches, as is Rick Biasucci's. Niall's new loft is the same. Jack's small loft has some wire, but also enough wood he scrapes his floors every day. In his racing loft, John Marles has a combination of wood and wire, as does Bill Midieu. The theory is that partially open floors improve ventilation, but not everyone follows that theory. Don Hart's beautiful two-story loft is not only a joy to look at, it's consistently at the top of the action in Unit 10. But rather than wire, Don has solid wood floors, which he installed after visiting European friends advised him.
I used to have wood grates in here. My friend William DeBrun from Holland came over. He said, take them out. I took them out with solid wood, more work. But I could see the difference in the feather quality and everything. Everything improved.
His results make it obvious that all wire floor isn't the only option here. Oh, there is one hole in his solid floor where he has a trap door to lower crates of pigeons down to his truck below. I visited 2 other lofts with solid floors and with an added twist. AAA Lofts Andy Guillemon has adopted a solid floor system with an imported Belgian loft dressing. Tammy Thomas has followed AAA's system, and both of these lofts are winning enough to make it clear an open wire floor isn't the only way to go. Obviously, wire flooring lets air rise into the loft. AAA achieved the same basic result when he realized side vents could drop the interior temperature.
Before I put the flaps on, it was me and my friend was in here, and sweat was rolling off. We went in that loft there, and he's like, oh my God, it's 10 degrees cooler, because that loft had the flaps in the back. So I immediately called up the guy and said, you gotta get over here.
Dragon's loft has 2 options, where he can either open a flap beneath the perches or a flap on the back wall to stimulate airflow. The range of perch designs I saw matches the wide variety of floors. AAA loft that he built exclusively for classic race pigeons uses V perches.
So I keep it simple. You know, if you got box perches, they're in a box and they're smelling that ammonia all night. I went to the V perches. I have as much success now as I've had with boxes.
Don Hart keeps his birds on very simple thin perches, but he makes sure they're extended from the wall.
By going against the wall, you can get a lot of red mites and everything, you know. This way you eliminate all that.
Andy Kowalewski uses a simple design with open bottoms so he can easily scrape a row. Dewey DeBoer likes the same system. Grande uses thin box perches in his young bird sections, as does Manny at Gallo Loft. Bill Midieu has a novel system of box perches with a catch box for droppings at the bottom. Still others prefer traditional box perches. Dragon has a style that can easily be converted into small nest spaces. Lori has the sophisticated European boxes that can also be converted from individual perches to nest boxes. Jack prefers the deeper box system because it lets him match a bird to its droppings, so he can spot good condition or trouble.
They're dry. They got 3 or 4 little down feathers. Yeah, I found them like that this morning. That's very, very, very good. If they have the droppings at night and you don't see any down feathers every day, then they may not be 100% healthy.
One thing everyone has is a lot of sliding wire and dowel doors. The average young bird team can be easily more than 100 birds, and a trainer has to section off different teams. Normally, birds for the Classic are only raced in short sprint races, while other teams are sent to longer distances each week. So managing pigeons here is a little like crowd control at a busy school. Grande, for example, has over 200 young birds that he tags with different colored rings to ID them. He also lets them move from section to section by walking rather than flying down the hall. One notable exception to the rule was John Marles' huge loft, who has the fewest pigeons per foot of any I visited. John feels capacity is an issue that's too often ignored.
I don't know, I've always felt it was a key. Back home I had a 24-foot loft and I only had 20.
Yeah.
Here I think I've got close to 90, and I think that with the cocks there's about 40 and 60 feet, so. Yeah, I think that's a part of the reason why we dropped some in it.
There's enough demand down here for lofts that different groups will custom build one for you. Tammy Thomas bought hers from Amish builders who know what fanciers like. It cost her $8,000 for the shell to be delivered, and she spent another $4,000 on the finished interior. That's for a 32 by 10 loft, which is pretty typical. Dragon bought a used loft for a good price and paid $500 for it to be moved.
Believe it or not, they moved this loft for $500. They went there at 4:30. By 5:30, the loft was set up here in my house. Less than an hour.
But many fanciers want custom design features they think will improve results. Niall Hyde chose to build a larger loft on site, so his cost will be several times a standard shell. I did like one novel idea Niall has that I'm used to seeing up north. He has heating pads on the floor.
You have a big problem here in Florida with humidity. And in the morning time especially, it's 100% humid. And these take a little bit off the humidity. They burn it off a little bit faster. And you put the grit and stuff like that on it so it doesn't draw in the dampness and the moisture.
Other lofts have cost well over $50,000 for elaborate two-story structures, or a fancier will build an array of lofts. It depends on their pocketbook. But considering the amount of time they spend in them, most people don't scrimp. Sometimes lofts, and even pigeons that come with the house, are a bargain if the seller's motivated and there aren't too many pigeon buyers at the time. Jack's story illustrates what $170,000 can buy you in the unit.
No, I bought this house last year from a pigeon guy, Chris Casa, who moved south in Florida. I got a house, a beautiful house. I come in, I walk, and there's two big breeding lofts, 24 feet long breeding lofts. I'm like, wow. Never had to do a thing to them except a little remodeling. I think I was gonna mail all my breeders here, which I did, all that, but come to find out, he wasn't taking his breeders with him. So he had like 12 pair of breeders. He said, Jack, if you want, they're already breeding, they're already raising babies, go ahead and you can keep them if you want. And the kicker, too, was a golf cart. So me and Lori go to negotiate the deal with the guy about the house, you know, back and forth a little bit at the kitchen table. And Lori, I'm kind of confused when Lori says to me, well, geez, Chris, what about the golf cart? You know, what's... And I'm thinking to myself, golf cart? I don't golf. Why is he talking about a golf cart in a house negotiation? This is goofy. But I didn't say nothing like golf cart. Anyways, Chris said, well, all right, I'll throw in the golf cart. And Lori looks at me with a smirk. I said, Lori, what do I need a golf cart for? He says, you'll be surprised. It'll be the best thing in this whole deal. He says, when you gotta come back down that little hill in the backyard and create all those birds, you're gonna appreciate that golf cart. And Chris says, oh yeah, you're gonna love it. I said, all right, whatever, I don't know. And sure enough, man, I love that golf cart. I love it.
They may not all have golf carts, but they range from pigeon palaces to more humble affairs. And as usual, the pigeons don't seem to care as long as there's enough fresh air. Just about every variation you've seen is still competitive. The pigeons in Spring Hill are a unique mix compared to other areas. Some of the old guards families have over 20 generations on this tough tropical course, but the Gulf Coast Classic adds a fascinating twist. It may only cost $100 to enter a pigeon, but let's face it, there are thousands of young birds sent here every spring whose imported parents may have cost 100 times that, or both parents are proven champions in some other part of North America. A member can take in up to 75 pigeons, but can't handle their own birds in the Classic. So there's a lot of sharing of good youngsters just among the members. As insurance, some of the lofts in the unit put birds up on the short end, and vice versa in case the weather that day favors Little Belgium. But in terms of genetic variation in the breeding lofts here, there is a key rule in the Classic. After the race, birds become the property of the handler.
The Classic, you're allowed to have 75 birds. per person, which it would be sent to you. First place is 40,000, second 20 and 10, and they pay out to 300 something positions. So it's probably one of the best races for money's worth. For $100, you can win 40,000. You ain't gonna win that nowhere, really. So, plus it gives people opportunity to get different pigeons they probably don't have an opportunity to get, or buy pigeons. They get to acquire some better pigeons. You know, people send good pigeons down here. The best of the best.
So, at the end of every classic, a handler has proven new bloodlines to blend into his own family. It creates a rich stew of proven racers mated best to best. It also means this is probably the one pigeon place on earth where fanciers don't bore you for hours with their power to memorize pedigrees. It's very refreshing. But let's talk about the birds themselves. I enjoy using new cameras to show pigeons in slow motion. When you watch them eat, it always looks like chaos. But slowed down to 10% of real time, and you see a bird is actually thinking about every grain. That's because pigeon brains, like many birds, process visual information about 3 times faster than ours. They literally see in slow motion. It's how small birds can catch fast insects, or a bird can fly through a forest at 50 miles an hour and not hit anything. They also hold their head like a gyro, something we also seldom notice. Did you catch that? Watch how this pigeon sees my camera and holds focus on it while his entire body heads for the exit. I know, nothing about molting, sorry, but a little interlude for you. Back to the power molt. First off, the young birds here are beautiful. Jack's flock is typical of pigeons expertly cared for that have gone through the light system to be almost fully molded before their first race. The vast majority of young bird trainers in the north are using darkening. Only a few try the light system, often with good success. But the race schedules here make it ideal because they race in the fall and winter, not in spring and summer.
Well, darkening up north was perfect. It was the perfect climate for it because we started flying at the end of July and we were through in the middle of October.
What they call a power molt involves keeping youngsters on summer light levels from birth and then, after minimal spring training around the loft, stimulating a full molt by clipping the last 3 flights and pulling the tail feathers. 45 days of complete rest and massive amounts of protein yields a fully molded young pigeon by the time races start in September.
I don't want them up routing, I just want them to know where they live. And then around the end of May, I shut them down, shut the lights off, because I do the light system.
We start with the lights as soon as we start breeding and keep them on.
Whenever we put the lights on, right, you know, from that day 1 to about June.
The middle of May, we cut the flights. It dries them out, and it's a lot easier for them to come out. A lot of people do, a lot of people don't, but I think it's easier on the bird because the air dries it out. I cut the flights, I pull the tail out. 2 weeks later, June 1st, I pulled the 3 flights out, 8, 9, and 10.
I pull the flights early June.
3 of the flights, 8, 9, and 10.
We cut the flights, we pull the tails, and we keep them in for 6 weeks.
And they're shut down for 40 to 45 days.
And that's when I turn the lights off. Then they go through a body mode.
They don't let them out. They're on high protein, the highest protein diet I could get them on. They get high protein to push the feathers.
Near the end of July, when I start letting them out, that's when it's time to go. Because August 10th is my start date for going up the road.
At that point, they're ready to go on Andy's trailer, and it's a long, 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 long process. Eventually, it pays off.
You notice the N2 flights were pulled, and they're a little shorter than they normally would be. And in fact, it has that little V, which is an indication that they were pulled. That'll straighten out next year when we molt them. You see the same thing over here. None of the other flights have that chip.
With a young bird program that ends in December and old birds starting a little over a month later, it's no surprise the old bird races are almost all yearlings. I know it may be hard to get your head around, but these yearlings get a month or 2 off, keep flying, and are in prime shape, compared to older birds that have been off the road for half a year. It also means that the best yearlings retire to the breeding loft, and if there's not room, get sold or given away. If I wanted to buy some of the best pigeons in America for very reasonable prices, I'd book a flight to Florida at the end of the GHC old bird season. Did I say these people are retired? I misspoke. They all simply left their old job and now work at their new job 7 days a week, dawn to dusk. Did I say dawn? Wrong again. I had to use a special surveillance setting on my camera to show you Tammy Thomas's pre-dawn hand loading of part of her flock for a training toss. Then I followed her along dark streets to a shopping mall parking lot where she puts her birds on the AAA training truck run by Andy Guillemot. The gang's all here. Berkey, McConnell, and a slew of early birds shipping pigeons 50 to 60 miles north to fly home. They go as early as they can because of the heat, and they often all have breakfast together too. Same story with Jack, who loads his birds before the sun's up and ships them with Laszlo Centendry. You purchase 1 or 2 crates on the truck for a season, load them with your birds, and let the trainer know if you want them released with others or on their own. Think of the time and gas that saves. And if you're jealous they have this training option, this will really get you. AAA, Laszlo, and Grande are 3 of 7 different rigs you can use almost any day of the week. Yes, even when they're racing, they will still send other birds to train the same day. Some do the training to earn a little money. Others do it themselves. Bill Midiu and Mike Caraturia and a few others bought a German trailer, and each of the 5 owners takes a turn driving once a week.
Like I said, 5 of us share this, which means each guy drives 1 day a week, and we take Wednesdays off, and we take I think we take Fridays off because that's shipping the big race day. But that 1 day, you do anything they want, anywhere they want to go. And if the guy wants his crate at a time, he wants his 60 miles, the other guy wants his 40 miles. Okay, I'll drop to the 60 and I'll come back to 40, And it works out real well.
As you saw, Andy Guillemot does it on a big scale. His trailer is the largest.
I enjoy doing it. I want to do it right for everybody. I'm the only guy that gives people individual training, solo training, whatever they want. If they want to go with this guy or that guy, long end, short end, whatever they want, they get on my truck. And I call them all with their release times.
He also thinks everyone has to think as much about where they train as much as when they train.
When I first came here, everybody told me, go 41, 41. So then after a couple of years, I got on Google Earth and I started pinning where I was training. And then I pinned the line of flight from the races because we fly straight north. And I was like 6 miles off the line. I'm like, I know this from Rhode Island. If I didn't try it on a line to my loft, you were out of it. So I went to the line and boom. I'm going to say I've been in the top 10 champion loft points about every year I've been here.
There are advantages beyond saving money to letting someone else train for you. Obviously, they can send their birds a lot. I'd say at least 2 times the training regimen of most other areas. Best of all, you stay home.
You're back home in your yard with your coffee and your droppers, and you wait, and it's great. I like to be home when they're home, when they come back, so this way I can throw droppers and get them used to the simulating a race,
A few fanciers like Tammy hand load every bird. But to handle sheer volume, there's a common system here you might be interested in. First, their crates are not standard. They open at each end, not in the middle. This facilitates putting them end to end and herding birds into the box. Lots of lofts have this type of outside door and frame to put crates on. Hugh Frazier demonstrated how these work. The birds simply walk in. After a while, it becomes routine. Laurie does it right inside his young bird section. Jack has an outside system and can load everyone, then take out any he doesn't want to ship. As always, I found an iconoclast, Don Hart, who wins as much as anyone, but isn't about to put that many miles on his birds.
These birds get trained once a week. Unlike a lot of the guys here, they train every day. I don't. I train once a week. I train 60 miles, 60 to 70 miles once a week. And then they go into the race. They fly in the morning and at night. Normally they fly about 40 minutes to an hour in the morning, about a half an hour at night.
Rick Biasucci is an advocate of both sending birds down the road plus hours of loft flying.
Well, we train them every day, like I said, anywhere from 50 to 75 miles. And on the weekend, on Sundays, once we get up a little further, AAA goes 100 miles every Sunday. So my classics will have 12 to 1,500 mile races. They're trained hard. You know, it's all the extra 100-mile races. They're road smart, but they're not burned out. You know, you put them in a 200 or 250, they hit a bad day, and they don't come back here. It takes, you know, a long time to bounce back here. And I don't train my birds unless they're flying around the house for at least 2 to 2.5 hours.
He shared what he called his secret weapon. What would be called the flag system elsewhere, we'll just call the garbage bag system in Spring Hill.
When I see him going a half an hour, I bring out the secret weapon, the pole with the garbage bag. It's about a 30-foot pole, and I just hold it and I wave, and I don't let them come down for an hour. Once I get them staying up there for an hour, they'll start to drift away. They'll start routing once they get that hour under them. Then I showed you how I just lean it over the top. It just stays and it dangles there, and they won't come down for 2 to 2.5 hours. Once they go 2 to 2.5 hours, then I know I can start training. My first toss is 10 miles, and I don't have any problems. I started with 192 pigeons training this year, and I got 184.
There are risks on the road. Flying too far in the wrong direction with a high heat index is deadly. Most fanciers try to make sure their young birds are pretty savvy before they send them on the training trucks.
Yeah, I think you have to be extremely careful when training because you could take liberties at home. But here, there's so many groups that go over in the morning. If they're not really, really ready, I wouldn't even contemplate taking them out. And you have to go slowly. You know, I never trained from 3 miles before, but I do down here. I normally would start at 15, 20 back home, but you can't do that here.
No matter how careful you try to be, returning trainers can get caught in the sudden summer downpours that roll in fast off the ocean. Birds sometimes have to land to wait it out, or they may land when they see other pigeons. Jack saw this when his trainers landed and unthinkingly ran through the monsoon to catch a bird he knew wasn't his.
He landed with my bird. He's not my bird. That happens all the time. There's so many pigeons that they get confused. You are soaked. You're in the wrong loft, buddy.
The amount of training options and miles people put on their pigeons is increasing, folks told me. I talked to one champ who thought he knew why.
You know, when I started here in 2007, I like a trainer, but you need to train the bird. I'm training every day, every day. A lot of people here, he not training like me. Now, everybody training more on me. You know?
Manny was half kidding, but the reality is that many of the new flyers, especially young Cubans like Manny, have picked up the pace of work here. Training in the heat and humidity of August is one of the things that makes these pigeons so fast. There's a lot of reasons to recommend Spring Hill. One of them are the friends that you make and the homes that they live in. Okay, sorry. I just had to show that. But did you notice the big screened-in pool? Apart from the heat and humidity, this tropical paradise is almost 20% water, and I don't mean Florida's ocean beaches. I mean the tens of thousands of lakes and swamps and damp places where every kind of crawly thing or bug can thrive. From microbes growing in your drinkers to mold on your pigeon food, this is a tough area for maintaining top health. There are a lot of nasty creatures, from the microscopic to something a little larger, like alligators. You think I'm kidding, but at the far southern end of the racecourse, Andy Kowalewski has what you might call a lakefront loft. It wasn't always this way, but with Florida's wacky hydrology, what was once an open field with a swampy stream running through it is now a lake. And yes, a big alligator did come up to the edge before he thought to fence it and almost killed his dog. Andy's one of the old guard, retiring here after building engines for Ford for 33 years. He came to Cleveland, Ohio as a young man from post-war Poland and learned English in a classroom at the factory. He's flown well here, at least before the flood. He's the only handler with a trifecta, winning both the Classic, the big GHC auction race, and their special band race. But he's also the longest loft, about 5 miles beyond Unit 10, close to the GHC's southern boundary. His loft sits on blocks above the water. He has shades he lowers at night to reduce the humidity.
And I got the curtains at the night lower it down so that the humidity won't go into my loft, you know.
Other than normal vaccinations, he doesn't use a lot of medications, he says, but he swears by a potion made by someone called Dr. Pigeon he sprays on the perches to keep flies and mosquitoes away. At 77, Andy's working hard to keep up with the new kids, but his new waterfront loft has to be the toughest place in the GHC to keep birds healthy, not including the alligators. John Marles is looking for something a little smaller than an alligator. He's one of several fanciers here serious enough to learn to examine droppings for problems. He's seen the level of microscopic care improve over the years.
I think the competition level here is really, really high. And the reason I say that is because I would say right now that there have to be at least 30 to 40 fanciers who are constantly checking the birds, I would say on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. When you're testing for tricho, worms, coxie, and all those other great things, I think the level of competition just goes through the roof. I've seen that.
Health wins races. And a gentleman that started me in pigeons in '78 was from Brooklyn, New York, and him and his dad had them since 1938. And he used to tell me, Andy, you can beat them with health. Forget about the training, forget about everything. Health will win races. And it does.
How to achieve top health is what you could call a healthy debate among some of the top guys.
No, I don't like it too much. Yeah, I need to do it, I do it, you know. But I don't like it medication to bird. I do it sometime, one time a week. Sometimes I don't do it. Before I started racing, you need a medication, yeah. I do it, I cure it. 10 days for cancer, 10 days for respiratory. I do it that before I started races. But when I started the race, I don't like to use it. But yeah, I need it, I use it, but I don't like it.
I'm heavy on medicating. I medicate every Saturday and Sunday and Wednesday. I double spoon them on Saturday and Sunday, and I 1 spoon in the water on Wednesday.
The issues of medication and feeding have gotten more sophisticated for another reason: choice. With 3 feed stores vying for everyone's business, the selection equals anything found in Europe. Several of the shops import pigeon food by the container load from Europe's leading suppliers. But fanciers also get to choose from both American and Canadian feed companies, and that's just for mixed grains. There are also sources for individual grains, from peanuts to paddy rice. Because of the damp climate, it's important how you store your grain. Dewey DeBoer likes to keep small quantities in individual bins, and most members keep an eye out for the freshest grain they can find. As for supplements and medications, forget it. I could do a 5-hour film just on the different potions for sale down here. There are so many coming in all the time, members have to be careful not to use anything that might be on the long list of banned substances. What most do is try to design a system and work it religiously.
These guys are, there's a lot of very good flyers down here. So when you come down, you can't be part-time about it and expect to do well. You have to work, you have to be on your game. get up every morning and get your training in properly. Stay on your health and meditation program very strictly. If you take any shortcuts, it shows right away that weekend. You have to be on your game.
Keep me healthy, health, you know. And you gotta have a system. Constantly be on time. Feeding, watering, training too.
You gotta work every day here. If you want to be competitive, there's no, well, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. As soon as you skip a little bit, you'll get punished. You know, the first year I came, I was doing super. I was flying excellent. Got a little lazy. Ooh. The next day you will find out. Don't do your work one day, you will get spanked. There's somebody doing the job.
No matter what treatments they prefer, you have to be as careful with them as you are with your feed storage. Like many, Dewey has a small refrigerator right in his loft. Bill Midiu keeps a full-size refrigerator in his breeding area, essential in a climate that spoils things quickly. That even means water.
That's the third change this morning. I started with that Muscle Max. First of all, honey, Muscle Max, and then that's actually just a combination of Winsmore, Primalac, and apple cider vinegar. I think down here you have to change the water quite often just to keep the tricho down. That's just my own feeling.
The problems of a single loft are compounded for a one-loft race. I visited with John Gallagher, who has run the Flamingo Challenge race here for years during Classic Week. He takes in hundreds of pigeons, trains them individually in his own trailer, and has to make sure he doesn't miss a step in anything that keeps these birds healthy.
You got 2 sinks, this has got bleach in it. We wash them with bleach and soak them. See? Nice and clean water.
Like pigeon flyers I've met everywhere, each one has some favorite grain or potion.
And I give them some sunflower seed without the skin, you know. Yeah, and I put them little lemon on the seeds.
John Marles probably buys the most peanuts of anyone. He's used them to create a calm rapport with his team of pigeons.
You take
Ginger root?
Yep, I buy it from the store. I take a whole thing of garlic. Smell that. You smell it?
Wow, yeah, what's for dinner?
Yeah,
Italian
exactly.
restaurant. So that's garlic and ginger mixed in there. There's pieces in there.
Mm-hmm.
And you put it in fresh and then...
And I stir it up, a whole clove of garlic, and I peel it. Peel all the little ones off. By hand. I'll take a ginger root, and peel it, chop it, throw it in the blender, and blend it up. And it's pieces. It's not liquid. And throw it right in there and mix it up. That's some of the stuff. Now, you can't tell anybody that. That's on camera.
The feed stores also offer an incredible array of grit and treats, and these get used in huge amounts to offset the effect of the bird's hard work. Jack is typical of many lofts I visited where he puts out a wide variety of fresh grit so the birds can take what they think their bodies need. Vitamins, minerals, supplements, drugs for all the critical diseases are considerations above and beyond what and how much to feed pigeons here. That's also a very fine line.
And I think that's why down here you have to be very, very careful with your feeding, because you can't overfeed these guys because they're not, at this time of the year, losing any body due to, trying to conserve heat. So I think you have to be very, very careful.
No, what I'm saying, feeding is one of the most important things. And a lot of guys think that they're going to train their bird 50, 60 miles, the bird's going to come home, and they're going to feed them once a day. That poor bird's going to stuff itself, and it's no good for its system. It's like you trying to run 10 miles, and you have to go home and eat as much as you could. You're not going to get fed at night. It's ridiculous. That's what they say about a human. If you could eat 4 or 5 times a day, your system works better. And that's why I feed twice a day. I like to stay around that ounce. I feed 15 pounds. I feed 8 in the morning and 7 at night. And that's how I like to do it. And every morning when you get them to train, they're completely empty.
As John said, the warm climate means birds don't need food to maintain body heat. Instead, you see them pant, which is basically how a pigeon sweats. But racing in the tropics has an impact on how their bodies recover after a race. In the north, the standard is that returning Saturday race birds go on light, depurative feed for several days. The tear them down to build them up plan. That is not the case here. Lori explains.
So you don't tear them down anymore on a Sunday?
Oh, no. Build them up. Well, if they're flying Saturday. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday morning, they get protein. Wednesday afternoon, they get fat. Thursday morning, they get fat. Thursday afternoon and Friday morning, they get carbohydrates. By the end of the week, if I've been training and feeding right, quantities is a big thing. And if I'm feeding right, by the end of the week, they're filled out, they're ballooned out, but they're light.
So much of the feeding and medication regimen is the result of decades of experiments. Any of these flyers who were once champs farther north will tell you they had to design a whole new system. So not a lot of what they do may apply to your location. But here's what does apply. Because the ultimate essential ingredient is a fancier that doesn't follow fads and pays attention to everything he or she puts in front of or into their pigeons. More than a decade ago, the GHC had a major problem. The digital German clocking system they'd adopted recorded a bird's return time to the 10th of a second. However, the American software program they used could not. It was written when most pigeon clocks counted to the second. That was once good enough, but not for the club in Spring Hill. They were often getting birds that tied, sometimes half a dozen. That's a problem in any race, but a nightmare when prize money can drop with each position. After several years of lobbying, the program was updated, becoming 10 times more accurate. Now each fancier's pink timed-in sheet shows arrival times down to the 10th of a second. It's how Bill Midiu knows he lost out on thousands of dollars by a whisker. Electronic timing is a godsend to fanciers who have to manage several hundred pigeons. And it all depends on the microchips each bird wears when it's racing. Keeping track of this falls to Jerry McIntosh, like Vernon and Sal, an essential member of the old guard who keeps things humming here. Each year, Jerry matches each pigeon's registration band to the microchip they carry. This year, he did it more than 12,000 times. The hallway next to his front door is piled with bags of chips that guys like Dragon come by to pick up so they can put them on their race birds. The chips do much more than clock races. They also allow every training toss to be recorded, so you can spot steady performers and laggers. It's a massive amount of data, and you don't do well here without keeping good records. Laurie uses the big sheets the club sells to track both his old bird and young bird teams. John Marles tracks his birds, but also keeps a diary of everything he can think of to give him hints of what is or is not working with his birds. He says he reads it all winter. Like Lori, the key information is which pigeons and which parents are exceeding others.
What I do is on the reporting sheet that I get, the pink sheet, I write the breeding box number next to the bird. And I go down only to the birds that made the points. So then once you get going into the races, you're saying, wow, this box 24, 24, 24, you know? And then on one sheet, you see, wow, I got 3 in the points off that pair. You know, I sent 3, they're all in the points. Those are key pairs.
Taking advantage of technology has helped the club stay current. It begins on shipping night, when each bird is scanned. The microchip must match their band, and then they go into the transport. By the time Jim Milligan comes to drive the transport away, they have an exact count of how many pigeons are in the race. While the fanciers sleep, Jim drives to the race point and sleeps a little in his rig. Then he does what he's been doing for over 13 years, getting up and tending to the race birds before dawn. At home, Jerry McIntosh has still another critical job. He's chairman of the Liberation Committees, responsible for checking the weather and starting the race. Jerry consults with Jim at the release site and his committee members in the early morning hours, making the go, no-go decision for the thousands of birds he's responsible for. Again, weather technology is a huge asset, Weather permitting, and as early as they can make it in the cooler morning air, Jim starts the race. At home, the fanciers get up, often expecting both trainers and race birds, and make sure their clocks are running. But as the tension builds, there's another key technology that's as important as your clock.
Yeah, Jack.
It's Vonnie.
Hello? Hey, Ricky.
Mikey Malay.
Hello? Yeah, Mike.
That my phone?
Yeah, this is Anthony. Mike's coming in. Concourse went up at 8:30, GHC 8 o'clock.
40, 50 seconds went by and I had, another group of them and another group.
Oh, there goes your group right over right now.
Hay un burujón de paloma, pero no sé cuál es.
GHC 19 and 22 seconds.
Okay, thanks a lot, Johnny. Bye. Grande clocked 3 minutes ago.
Okay.
The short end buried us.
I clocked at 48, 9:48.
I wish you good luck. All right, buddy, I'll talk to you later. Good.
It's only when you watch race birds come in that you understand what I mean by living in the fast lane. I spent time with Grande, whose loft is one of the shortest on the course and considered one of the men to beat on any day. He sits in a perch gazing north over this flat Florida scrubland of North Brooksville. He can barely concentrate, his phone rings so often, and he switches from English to Spanish depending on the caller asking if he's seen pigeons. There was a morning of false alarms as trainers piled in, but each time he used his droppers and electric whistle to call them in. When 3 race birds finally arrived, they took an extra swing as a noisy guest at a neighboring loft mistook them for their birds. That extra swing meant 3rd place by 5 seconds, 6th and 9th, in a 150-mile race with 2,000 pigeons. On an 84-degree day, when my sweat dripped into my camera's viewfinder, Grande's pigeons flew 2.5 hours at over 1,600 yards a minute, more than 56 miles an hour. For another race, I visited Rick Biasucci, almost 3 miles south of Grande. He's a widower who's devoted full-time both to winning and helping the sport here. He won the 2015 Classic by 43 seconds. Everything is a well-planned formula to Rick. He even knows which dropper to use based on how his arriving birds behave.
When I throw this guy here, he does the happy flap. I could throw him up and he'll hover and he'll come down, and I know which ones I could throw lower and they just go right to the loft.
The only thing not part of the plan here was a new puppy, a stray he adopted who chewed both my cameras and a crate while we waited for his birds. And Rick's still as excited as a kid every time that happens.
Here we go, here we go, here we go. Come on, come on, come on. Come on.
Rick's pigeons came from exactly where he wanted and trapped in quickly. The phone tree also reported his time was solid. The result of this 100-mile race, a few hours later when the race results were passed through the window, 12th by 23 seconds, again with over 2,000 birds. The first 50 places were gone in 60 seconds.
We'll get them next week.
For another race, I decided to take in one of the Unit 10 Club's Wednesday sprint races. Everything about this club is kind of a mini GHC. Smaller club, smaller transport, humbler digs, but much is the same, especially the faces. This sprint race is where many of the old guard give their classic and other money race birds experience on the road. Many of the rivalries here go back decades. As usual, Sal was doing most of the work and the usual suspects were doing most of the talking. And as usual, Jim Milligan was hauling these 600 birds too. This time to Alachua, their standard 100-mile station, about 50 miles from the Georgia border. The next morning, I went to Don Hart's beautiful loft. My aerial camera shows how close some of these aces live to each other. The red-roofed loft in the distance is Randall Berkey's on what they call the Hill. Now, a hill in Florida is the equivalent to a speed bump in my Montana, but this bird's eye view makes it clear Randall's pigeons can probably see their home a fair ways out. This is Randall's third location in Spring Hill. Yes, people move just to shave a few seconds. Like Grande, Don is on a lot of people's speed dial, but I had time to set up some nice camera angles. You won't see a much more perfect arrival than Don Hart's pigeons. The dropper goes up, curves perfectly to the board, and down come the racers. The first pigeon, after 2 hours in the air, landed perfectly on a 2-foot square pad. Done. I was impressed. Don was cool. All around the neighborhood, you could hear the sound of whistles as birds poured in. The result of that picture-perfect landing? 7th place. Manny clocked 5 birds in 5 seconds a mile north, and Randall snuck one in a second ahead of Don. However, he had the consolation of 7 in the first 20. The first 50 places were gone in as many seconds. How did Manny get 5 birds in 5 seconds? Maybe it had something to do with this novel landing board he created, where the racers have only the pad to land on when they arrive. Details this small win races here. These races illustrate why getting your name on the first page is an honor, and getting a high percentage in the top 20% is an art. As for Jack, Jack was looking for 32 seconds. That Wednesday sprint was the second time he was 32 seconds out of first in the unit.
And then here I am here, 30th. 30th, I needed 32 seconds. Last week I needed 32 seconds.
He's trying to find 32 seconds though, John.
2 weeks in a row, John, 32 seconds.
Considering his pigeons almost need a map to see his loft among the trees, that's understandable, but not to Jack. In spite of getting an excellent percentage of his birds in the top 20%, he agonized about that half a minute. And he didn't do himself any favors. He had a wonderful hen we called Lazy Mary, who was his first pigeon 2 races in a row. A lot of fanciers would try again, hoping she'd finally score. Nope. Jack had a plan to save his best young hens for 3 years. So Mary raced twice and will never have to work again. I had to leave Spring Hill to get this show edited, but Jack kept me advised on what he was doing. He added an exhaust fan in a part of the loft. He carefully weighed his feed when he noticed that fractions of an ounce in their last meal seemed to improve results. And as he did while I was there, I bet he kept asking anyone he trusted for advice. Less than a month after he started looking, Jack called to tell me he'd found his 32 seconds.
Good race. Well, I'm proud of you. That's great.
I mean, exactly 32 seconds, winning the GHC's southern section in a hard 250-mile race from southern Georgia. Those are a few stories of how it is down here. These split-second results weren't ones I picked out for their drama. This is exactly how they happened over a few weeks I spent with these folks. That's how they live in the fast lane. And like Rick said and Jack proved, you better get up every morning thinking you have a chance to get them next time, or you better race somewhere else. It's not hard to see what brings people to live and compete in Spring Hill. If pigeon racing is your thing, then you're going to get plenty of it in the Florida sunshine. But more than how often you race, it's the people you race against that get most folks excited.
Those people coming here, Tony Malucci, Randall Berkey, Horace Takema, you know, they're legendary. They're legendary figures. They've won everything that needs to be won and has been won. These men, some of them are in their 80s, in their upper 80s. Tony celebrated his 88th birthday last week, and I guarantee you, anyone that beats him will earn it. He's not going to give it. And Randall, what can I say about Randall? Randall is what he is. You know what I mean? He's an icon. He's an icon.
There are certainly clubs and combines around the world with larger numbers of entries. There are groups that have many more members, but it's never been about quantity down here. It's about quality. No one ships 100 birds against another's half dozen. The 25 bird limit levels the playing field. And considering how rigorously the entrants have been trained and how expertly they've been cared for, it's quite a playing field.
The GHC is Yankee Stadium. Now, you don't want to be playing in a local ball field when they're playing ball. Let's all play ball in Yankee Stadium, because we're here. We're in Yankee Stadium.
And there is even a quiet member here who has actually played in Yankee Stadium. Gene Nelson was a major league pitcher for 13 years, playing for the Yankees, but also as an ace reliever during the heyday of the Oakland A's. Among this array of faces and dozens of ethnic backgrounds, Gene's just one of the boys trying to get to the top of the list. Florida can be a heartbreaking place to race. The conditions are tough. Losses can be high when flocks go the wrong way and the heat index is high, and predators are everywhere. I told you Disney World doesn't have white pigeons anymore. The reason? So many hawks were killing birds literally over the heads of vacationing families, they decided to end the bloodshed. I'll probably start a controversy calling the birds who race here some of the fastest in the world, but given the velocities they fly, combined with the atmospheric conditions I explained to you that they compete in, I welcome the debate. When you consider how fast the first 50 positions disappear in almost every race, you realize the first wave of birds here is an unusually large one. That many pigeons are that healthy, that strong, flying over 50 miles an hour, that close to victory. Even at 500 and 600 mile stations, they have finishes that are down to a few seconds. It's a testament to the quality of the birds and their handlers. As more and more of the new faces are Hispanic, there are some interesting dynamics going on in the GHC. These younger fanciers, like Manny, are much more interested in team performance than getting a single lucky bird in first place. Like Belgian veterans, they talk about how many they had in the first 10% or 20% of returns.
Or the Cuban guy, he like it, put the team together. You know, I see in one race I got one bird, I say no good. I see 5 birds together, I say it's good race. I see 15 birds in the point, it's super good race. You know, I send the 25. Last week I sent the 25, I got 15 in the point. I say I do it good.
Younger families joining also adds a new twist to what was once this clubhouse full of retirees, kids. Whether they represent the next generation of fanciers is hard to say, but their parents obviously do, in a group where the old guard is well into their 70s. I'm sorry I don't speak better Spanish. I could have done a better job profiling more of these friendly young guys who are exceptional pigeon flyers. Yanil Garcia is an example, moving into the unit with his family from Tampa and immediately getting on the front page. But I think a lot of them wish they spoke more English as well. The dynamic here has changed. The short end has grown, and Unit 10 has to fight harder than ever to prevail. And the language barrier between Spanish and English speakers is an issue the entire country has been wrestling with for generations. Many of the old guard in the unit speak fondly of the early days when the commonality of retirees' backgrounds created a sense of family. You still see it. Of the more than 100 funerals, one was for Tom Luberts, a friend of Jack's who convinced him to move south. He started failing at the beginning of the young bird season, and Jack and Joe Smolinars remember pushing Tom's bed to the window so he could see his young race birds coming home.
I wonder how God works. He got sick just before, well, during training young birds. He made it through the whole entire race season. Every week we rolled the bed over it. He watched every single race, and he had. Then we had the classic, the big GHC classic race at the end of the season. It was the last race of the season. We rolled him up to the vet, the thing. He watched the race, saw what happened, and I think within 3 or 4 days he passed away. So it's like, wow, he made it through every race.
Every race, yeah. They kept him going.
He wasn't going to leave until he saw that last race.
And to help Tom's widow, everyone pitched in to run a yard sale and pack her stuff. Lori's wife, Terry, Sal's wife, Marge, automatically helped out a fellow pigeon family. And as usual, Sal got sent to get the donuts.
All our families are someplace else, so what do we got? We got each other. That's it, you know?
Yeah, it's making a family. That's exactly what we need.
But the tension between the old guard and young Hispanic immigrants is a little overblown. It's not so much a clash of cultures, but a language issue. Behind the scenes, a lot of strong bonds are forming. A couple examples. Randall Berkey, the epitome of the old guard, and as fierce a competitor as I've ever seen in a lifetime making these films, is one of the first names you hear when you ask a new arrival like Grande who's helped him.
Randall Berkey. I ask him every time I got some problem, I ask him. That guy is a master.
Advice, pigeons, friendship, those are the things that melt differences. And looking at these two friends, I don't know who's the true giant, the huge refugee or the tiny old-timer who's made him feel welcome in a new land. The same can be said for the name Tony Malucci, one of America's most legendary fanciers. Manny Rodriguez asked his advice about building a new loft after he won the Classic.
I want to do a new one, but my friend Tony Malucci, he told me, no do it. He told me that loft is good and good. You don't need to put in nothing new.
Later, as I was loading my camera gear to leave, Manny was saying goodbye. He put out his hand and touched my arm and said, "You know, Tony been like a father to me." Strong stuff.
Gallo was a good guy and a good friend. I've had a couple of birds from him that he's put in my loft, the Classic, and they've been outstanding birds.
Tony's pushing 90 and fighting ill health and still fighting to win races. But he's optimistic that the cultural differences, the sectional rivalries, will all work out.
It's a strange mixture, but it's a good mixture. And if they treat it right, I think it'll survive and be great. Try to get along and enjoy it. You only come by once.
You may not know it, but I recently wrote a novel called The Featherhood. It's a fictional story of a priceless Belgian champion pigeon imported as a breeder to America that escapes, is injured, and is saved by some inner city kids. I coined the term the Featherhood to describe the bond that forms between black and white kids because of their common love of pigeons. It mirrors my childhood experiences and a lifetime of working with pigeon people around the world who don't speak my language. Underneath it all, that love of these birds makes us friends in ways most other people can simply not understand. I see that here in Spring Hill. There may be more multilingual signs, there will be some tension, but the club they built here is strong enough to weather that. And the new faces in the unit, like Paul and Jim, Tammy, Niall, have decades of racing in front of them. They'll be the ones working with Grande, Manny, and the others to keep this club the best in the country. And then there's Jack. Jack Tedesco didn't know he'd be in a movie. He thought he was offering a bedroom to a friend of a friend. But I've never had anyone help me more on a film than Jack. He took me to visit fanciers, he helped me set up shots, and he let me fly my aerial camera with his race team so often they got used to it, leading to some wonderful images of these beautiful birds in flight. He never asked or expected to be in a pigeon film seen around the world. That's not Jack. But as a newcomer, his story perfectly illustrates how the GHC's reputation as being a snake nest of competition is way off the mark. I'll let him explain how it felt coming here.
I'm very, very fortunate. And, you know, we think about Spring Hill, Florida, and how intense it is. You know, the racing and, oh my gosh, we got to beat this guy or do this. And 2 seconds slow, I'm this and this and that, which is all part of the whole thing. It's intense. And you can really drive yourself crazy. But when I was on the outside, because I knew of Spring Hill, Florida for years, and when I was on the outside, I would think about it. Wow, what a crazy place that is. I mean, those guys must be at each other's throats trying to beat each other like that. And tell you the truth, it's not like that. On race day, yeah, I gotta get the bird. But really, the whole thing about this place is we're one big family. Like I said, I came here with 12 boxes in my car, and I have so many people that love me, and I love them, that it's incredible. So now I'm gonna cry. But no, it's a social thing. It's pigeon racing, but it's a social thing.
Yeah.
We go to breakfast, we go to dinners. There's the Thursday night bowling crew. There's the Friday night gang if you want to go with them. You know, that's the nice part about it is you can just do what you want to do, and you know they're there for you no matter what. And on race day, everybody is happy for you. We always shake the hand of the winner, whoever it is, whether you know him or not. And it's a fantastic place.
And I got as big a dose of Italian as I did of Spanish here, thanks to Jack. I can't share it, but he revealed his mother's secret recipe for spaghetti and meatballs. And on my last day, he threw a big wrap party for some of the guys who helped us make this movie. After almost 3 weeks of 12-hour days working in the grueling heat, I was pretty tired. But around midnight, we finally got the happy crowd to go home so we could clean up. And Jack played the theme song of my days here. When that little hen, Lazy Mary, came first, alone, twice, and earned her place in the breeding loft. Well, that's our show. And as I said at the beginning, I found a story in Florida that's as much about great people as it is about great pigeons. I can't thank the folks in Spring Hill enough for making me feel so welcome and helping me tell their story. I certainly hope you enjoyed this film as much as I did making it. I'm Jim Jenner. Thanks for watching.